Have you ever looked at your neighbor's hydrangeas and wondered why theirs look like they belong on a magazine cover while yours stay small, weak, and flowerless year after year? The difference is not better soil. It is not a better climate. It is not luck. It comes down to 7 silent mistakes that destroy thousands of hydrangeas across America every single season. And here is the most important thing to understand right now. Every single one of these mistakes is easy to fix once you know what to look for. Stay until the very end, because the final tip is something most gardeners never hear until they have already lost a full season of blooms. That one tip alone could completely transform your garden next summer. Mistake ER1, wrong location. Most gardeners assume that a bright-looking spot is a good spot. That assumption costs them an entire season every single year. Hydrangeas are woodland edge plants by nature. They evolved under broken forest canopies where morning light filters in freely and afternoon shade settles naturally as the sun moves west. When you place a hydrangea in a south-facing bed with 0 afternoon shade, especially in Georgia, Alabama, Texas, or anywhere in zones 6 through 9, you are asking a plant to survive conditions that are the complete opposite of everything its biology was designed for. Afternoon sun in these zones regularly pushes past 90 degrees Fahrenheit through summer. At that temperature, leaf tissue scorches, blooms collapse within days. The plant spends every ounce of energy trying to cool itself instead of producing flowers. Most gardeners respond by watering more. The extra water gives temporary relief, but the location is still wrong. The plant will struggle through every single summer until it is moved. What your hydrangea actually needs: minimum 4 to 6 hours of direct morning sun from the east, reliable afternoon shade from a fence structure or established planting to the west, uncontested soil not already claimed by aggressive tree roots. Speaking of tree roots, this is where even experienced gardeners make a critical mistake. Planting under a mature oak or maple feels smart. Dappled shade, organic leaf litter, a naturalistic setting that mirrors woodland conditions. It sounds perfect above ground, but underground, it is a disaster. Mature trees spread shallow feeder roots far beyond their canopy drip line. Your hydrangea is not just sharing that soil, it is competing against a root system that has been claiming that ground for decades. Above ground, everything looks reasonable. Below the surface, your hydrangea is being quietly outcompeted for every drop of water and every nutrient it needs to survive. The fix is simple. Choose a spot with morning sun, afternoon shade, and soil that belongs entirely to your hydrangea. That single location decision shapes long-term plant health more than almost anything else you will ever do. Mistake EO2, wrong hole. This mistake happens before the plant ever goes into the ground and the damage stays completely invisible for 2 or 3 full seasons before the plant begins a slow, confusing decline. Most gardeners dig a hole roughly the same size as the root ball. The gardener sees a hole. The roots experience a prison. The rule is simple and non-negotiable. Dig your hole twice as wide as the root ball. Not slightly wider, twice as wide. Hydrangeas feed and anchor themselves by spreading roots laterally, moving outward through surrounding soil to access water and nutrients. A narrow hole forces roots to turn inward rather than radiate outward the way the plant requires. When roots circle inside a confined space, they do not self-correct once the plant is in the ground. The circular pattern continues and intensifies over time. Eventually, a circling root wraps around the plant's own root flare and begins cutting off the upward flow of water and nutrients. From above ground, this looks exactly like disease or unexplained decline. The plant weakens gradually, never dramatically, and by the time the real damage becomes visible, it has been accumulating for years. Depth is equally important. The crown of your plant, the junction where the stem meets the root system, must sit exactly at soil level. Not 1 inch below, not 2 inches below. Flush with the surrounding grade. When the crown is buried, moisture accumulates around it, oxygen cannot penetrate, and crown rot establishes itself quietly. Crown rot is one of the leading causes of hydrangea failure in American home gardens, and in the vast majority of cases it started on planting day when the hole was simply dug too deep. The fix: dig wide and shallow, backfill with loose amended soil, set the crown exactly at grade. 3 simple decisions that eliminate one of the most common and most damaging causes of hydrangea failure across every growing zone in this country. Mistake LE3, ignoring pot-bound roots. This mistake happens in the 60 seconds between lifting a plant out of its nursery container and setting it into the ground. 60 seconds that most gardeners skip entirely, and the plant pays for it across multiple seasons. Nursery hydrangeas spend months, sometimes over a year, inside the same container. Throughout that entire time, the roots circle the interior walls, continuously searching for an exit that does not exist. By the time the plant reaches your hands, the outer root mass is frequently a dense, compressed layer of tightly wound, circling growth with nowhere left to go. How to check before you buy. Turn the container over and look at the drainage holes at the bottom. If thick, coiled roots are visibly emerging from those holes, the root system inside is severely pot-bound. That is not a minor inconvenience. It is a structural problem that will follow the plant into the ground unless you correct it before planting. When a bound root ball goes directly into garden soil without intervention, those roots continue doing exactly what they were doing inside the container. The surrounding soil provides no signal to change direction. They keep circling. A plant with persistently circling roots establishes slowly, feeds inadequately, never develops the lateral root spread that supports vigorous growth and consistent blooming. In serious cases, a circling root wraps progressively tighter around the plant's own root flare. The restriction gradually cuts off the upward flow of water and nutrients. The decline that follows looks exactly like drought stress or disease, sending gardeners toward completely wrong solutions because the real cause is hidden beneath the soil surface. The fix takes 60 seconds. Before the plant goes into the ground, lay the root ball on its side and use your fingers or a hand fork to pull the outer roots loose, directing them away from the center and outward. For severely compacted root systems, draw a clean knife down the outer surface of the root ball in 3 or 4 vertical lines. That scoring interrupts the circular pattern and prompts roots to grow outward into the surrounding soil. After that one preparatory step, establishment accelerates, lateral spread strengthens, and the plant performs the way you expected when you spent money on it at the nursery. Mistake UU4, neglecting soil preparation. Here is a truth most gardeners never hear. The hole is not the garden. The soil surrounding that hole is. A gardener who digs a hole, drops a plant in, and fills it back with whatever came out of the ground has skipped the single most important preparation step available before planting day. 2 soil types cause the most damage to hydrangeas across the United States, and they cause it in completely opposite ways. Heavy clay soil, common throughout the Southeast, Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic, holds water far longer than roots can tolerate. After soaking rain or deep watering, clay packs tightly around the root zone and creates a waterlogged, oxygen-deprived environment. Roots sitting in saturated clay cannot breathe. Decay sets in at the root tips first, then spreads inward. A plant with deteriorating roots displays every visible symptom of drought stress: wilting, yellowing foliage, stunted growth, because damaged roots cannot deliver moisture upward regardless of how much water surrounds them. The gardener waters more in response. The roots deteriorate further. The cycle continues silently until the plant is beyond recovery. Sandy soil, prevalent across the Carolinas, Florida, the Gulf Coast, and much of the Southwest, produces the opposite problem with identical consequences. Water moves through sandy ground so rapidly that roots make only brief contact with moisture before it drains entirely beyond their reach. A gardener can maintain a consistent watering schedule and still produce a chronically thirsty hydrangea because the ground holds nothing long enough for the root system to absorb what it needs. Both extremes, both damaging, both correctable. The fix: work aged compost thoroughly into the surrounding planting area, not just inside the hole. Compost improves drainage in clay and builds moisture retention in sand, addressing both extremes with the same material. Add leaf mold, which is simply decomposed fallen leaves, to build soil structure over time in ways manufactured products cannot replicate. Incorporate well-rotted manure, aged a minimum of 6 months, to introduce nutrients and microbial activity that feeds the root zone long after planting day has passed. Now the critical detail most gardeners overlook. Soil pH does not just affect bloom color. It governs nutrient availability at the root level. When pH moves too far outside the acceptable range, your hydrangea cannot absorb what it requires from the surrounding soil regardless of how much fertilizer you've applied. The nutrients sit in the soil. The plant continues to underperform. And the cause is never identified because the symptoms look exactly like a feeding deficiency when the underlying problem is soil chemistry. pH 5.5 to 6.0 produces blue blooms in bigleaf varieties. pH 6.5 and above shifts those same flowers toward pink. Too far in either direction and the plant cannot feed at all. A basic soil test resolves this before it becomes a recurring frustration. Most U.S. county cooperative extension offices provide testing for under $10. Many offer it free during specific seasons. The test returns a clear pH reading alongside specific amendment recommendations calibrated to your local region. Gardeners who test before planting and amend accordingly are the ones whose hydrangeas produce the blooms that make neighbors stop and ask questions. The ones who skip this step are the ones returning to the garden center the following spring, purchasing a replacement and placing it into the same unprepared ground. Mistake W5, surface watering. The name hydrangea comes from the Greek words for water and vessel. These plants carry their relationship with moisture in their very name, and that relationship is genuine. But it is misunderstood in ways that produce serious lasting damage in gardens across every American climate zone. Daily light sprinkles can actually be fatal. The most widespread watering error is frequency without depth. A gardener runs a hose across the root zone for a few minutes each morning. The surface looks moist. The assumption is that the plant has been adequately watered. It has not. Light, frequent watering moistens only the top 2 to 3 inches of soil. The established root zone of a hydrangea sits 8 to 10 inches below the surface. Shallow watering never reaches it. Roots follow available moisture. When moisture consistently stays near the surface, roots stay near the surface. A plant conditioned to shallow watering develops a permanently vulnerable root system that has no access to the deeper stable moisture reserves that carry a well-established plant through a dry week without visible stress. The correct standard. Zone 7 through 9, deep watering twice per week during peak summer heat. Zone 4 and 5, once per week is often sufficient outside of extended heat events. Each session must run long enough for moisture to penetrate a full 8 to 10 inches into the soil. How to verify depth. Press a wooden dowel or long screwdriver into the ground an hour after watering. If it slides in 10 inches without resistance, moisture reached where it was needed. Mulch is not a finishing touch. It is essential. A 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark, pine fines, or aged wood chips spread across the root zone extending outward to the drip line, never piled against the stem, accomplishes 3 critical things. Locks moisture into the soil between watering sessions, moderates soil temperature during heat events, suppresses competing weeds that draw directly from the same water supply your hydrangea depends on. In zones 6 through 9, a proper mulch layer reduces watering demand significantly during summer months. In zones 4 and 5, that same layer protects the root zone from the freeze-thaw cycles of early spring that disturb shallow root systems during the critical window when new growth is just beginning to emerge. The difference between a thriving hydrangea and a struggling one is often visible at ground level. A healthy plant carries a clean, even mulch ring extending well beyond its base. A struggling plant has bare, cracked, dry soil pressed directly against its stem. That single difference in ground management accounts for more visible outcome than almost any other factor in that comparison. Details at the soil surface are never minor. They accumulate into results. Mistake UU6, pruning without knowledge. This is the most heartbreaking mistake on this list. Every spring, across every growing zone in this country, gardeners walk out with clean pruners and genuine care for their plants and remove every flower the shrub was preparing to produce. The effort was real. The intention was sound. The result was still a completely flowerless summer with no path to recovery until the following year. The cause is straightforward. Different hydrangea varieties produce flowers on fundamentally different types of growth, and most gardeners were never given that information at the point of purchase. Here is what you need to know. Bigleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla, the classic mophead and lacecap varieties, bloom on old wood. Flower buds form on the current season's stems in late July and August, overwinter on the canes, and open the following year. Any pruning that removes those canes, whether during fall cleanup or early spring tidying, removes every single bloom. No buds remain to open. The season is lost before the soil even warms. Oakleaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea quercifolia, follow the same old wood pattern. They set flower buds on the previous season's growth and must be treated with identical timing consideration. Panicle hydrangeas, Hydrangea paniculata, including Limelight, Little Lime, Quick Fire, and Pinky Winky, bloom on new wood produced in the current growing season. These respond well to a hard cutback in late winter or early spring with no sacrifice to the flower display. In fact, a clean late winter pruning consistently produces stronger stems and larger bloom clusters. Smooth hydrangeas, Hydrangea arborescens, including Annabelle and Incredible, also bloom on new wood and perform reliably after a hard late winter cutback. These are among the most forgiving varieties available to American gardeners and established consistently from Zone 3 through Zone 9. The rule that applies across every variety: never prune a hydrangea without first identifying what it is, determine the variety, understand whether it blooms on old wood or new wood. Time every pruning decision accordingly. For old wood varieties, the only safe pruning window is immediately after blooming concludes in summer. Not fall, not spring. For new wood varieties, late winter before new growth emerges is the correct and productive window. Removing dead canes and crossing branches is appropriate at any time regardless of variety. But removing healthy canes from an old wood bloomer outside the correct window guarantees a flowerless summer with no recovery possible until the following year. Mistake UU07. Skipping the hardening off process. The excitement of a new purchase leads to one of the most damaging decisions a gardener can make. Rushing a plant straight from the garden center into the ground, that single decision, made in a moment of genuine enthusiasm, sets back every other effort regardless of how carefully the location was chosen, how wide the hole was dug, or how thoroughly the soil was amended. Here is what most gardeners do not know. Nursery hydrangeas are grown in controlled greenhouse environments. Consistent watering on precise schedules, filtered light through shade cloth overhead, regulated temperatures that never spike or plunge. The plant sitting on that garden center bench has never experienced full outdoor sun, unpredictable wind, or natural temperature variation. Moving it directly from those controlled conditions into a fully exposed garden bed is not a minor transition. It is a dramatic environmental shift the plant is entirely unprepared for. Transplant shock follows. Wilting within the first few days, leaf edges that brown and curl, foliage dropping without obvious cause, growth stalling completely for weeks. Gardeners who encounter these symptoms almost universally reach for the watering can or begin investigating soil conditions because the visible symptoms point in every direction except the actual cause. The plant is not diseased, it is not in wrong soil, it is overwhelmed by a transition it was never given time to prepare for. The hardening off process eliminates this entirely. Day 1, place the plant in dappled outdoor shade for 3 to 4 hours. Bring it back inside for the remainder of the day. Day 2, extend outdoor exposure by 1 to 2 hours. Continue increasing daily outdoor time by the same increment across a 7 to 10 day period. By the final day, the plant has experienced real outdoor light, natural wind movement, and ambient temperature variation in a graduated way that allows its cellular structure to adapt without crisis. A properly hardened off hydrangea goes into the ground as a prepared plant. Root establishment begins immediately. Foliage holds without browning. Growth resumes within weeks rather than stalling for a full season. Planting timing matters enormously. The 2 ideal planting windows for hydrangeas in the United States are early spring after the last frost date and before summer heat establishes itself. Early fall while soil temperatures remain warm but air temperatures have begun to moderate. Summer planting, dropping a hydrangea into the ground in June, July, or August across most American growing zones, forces a vulnerable, unestablished plant to fight heat stress and moisture demand simultaneously before its roots have any capacity to support that effort. Many do not survive at all. Zone-specific timing. Zones 7 through 9, fall planting consistently outperforms spring planting. Extended warm soil from September through November allows substantial root development before the ground cools. Zone 4 and 5, early spring planting is safer. A fall-planted hydrangea in Zone 4 has limited time to establish roots before the ground freezes, and an unestablished root system in frozen ground is a serious survival risk. Zone 6, both windows are viable. The choice often depends on nursery availability and your ability to commit to consistent watering through the fall establishment period. Expert tips. What separates great gardens from good ones? Root competition from trees. Most gardeners understand that planting under large trees creates shade problems. Shade is only the surface of the issue. The root systems of mature trees, particularly oaks, maples, and sweet gums, extend laterally well beyond the visible canopy edge. These feeder roots run shallow, often within the top 6 to 8 inches of soil, and claim moisture and nutrients from a far wider area than the tree's above-ground footprint suggests. Professionals avoid these zones entirely, or create raised amended beds that give the hydrangea its own distinct soil environment above the competing root layer. A raised bed of 12 inches or more filled with quality amended soil places your hydrangea's root zone above the aggressive lateral roots of surrounding trees and allows the shrub to develop freely. This approach works effectively in zones 5 through 9 and is particularly valuable in established landscapes where desirable planting locations are already occupied by mature tree root systems. Deadheading done correctly. Deadheading a hydrangea does not produce additional blooms within the same season the way it does with annuals or repeat blooming roses. What it accomplishes is a redirection of the plant's energy. When spent blooms are removed, the plant stops directing resources toward seed development and redirects them toward root strengthening and stem development. Investments that produce stronger growth and more abundant flowering the following season. The precision required is in the cut location. Remove spent blooms just above the first healthy full set of leaves below the bloom. No lower. Cutting deeper than that point on old wood varieties risks removing dormant bud tissue that was already forming for next season's flowers. On new wood varieties like Panicle and smooth hydrangeas, deadheading can be done more freely throughout the season without the same risk. Fertilizer timing. Well-intentioned gardeners cause damage here that they do not recognize until the following spring. The assumption that a tired-looking plant in late summer needs feeding is understandable. The result of acting on that assumption is damage that takes a full season to become visible. Nitrogen-rich fertilizer applied after midsummer, after late July across most U.S. growing zones, stimulates the production of tender new vegetative growth at precisely the moment the plant should be slowing its above-ground activity and directing energy downward into root consolidation. That tender new growth has no time to harden before the first frost arrives. Frost kills it. The plant enters the following spring with frost-damaged canes, weakened stem tissue, and reduced capacity to support the bloom production the gardener was hoping to encourage. The correct fertilizer schedule: single application of balanced slow-release fertilizer in early spring as new growth begins to emerge. One additional application in early summer if growth appears to need support. After that, stop completely. The plant is allowed to slow naturally, consolidate its root system, and prepare for dormancy on its own timeline. Gardeners who follow this schedule consistently will see stronger canes, more abundant blooms, and a plant that enters spring with genuine vigor rather than frost-weakened growth that must be cut away before the season can even begin. The final tip, the one most gardeners never hear until it is too late. This is the tip promised at the very beginning of this video, the detail that most gardeners never receive until they have already stood in front of a completely flowerless shrub in July and spent weeks wondering what went wrong. Winter bud protection. For gardeners growing old wood bloomers, Bigleaf hydrangeas, and Oakleaf hydrangeas, in zones 4 through 6, this is the single most impactful action available between the end of the growing season and the beginning of the next. Here is what most gardeners do not know. The flower buds that will open next summer are already present on the canes right now. They formed in late summer. They are waiting through the cold months to open when warmth returns. Those buds are alive. They are not dormant the way the rest of the plant is. They are vulnerable to temperature extremes, to freeze-thaw cycling, and to the desiccating wind that moves across exposed canes through a northern winter. When those buds are killed by winter conditions, not by pruning but by cold and exposure, the plant leafs out normally in spring, produces healthy green growth, and then produces no flowers. Everything looks right until the moment it becomes clear that nothing is coming. That is winter bud loss, and it is entirely preventable. 3 methods to protect your buds. Method 1, mulch and crown insulation. After the ground begins to freeze in late fall, typically November in zones 5 and 6, October in zone 4, apply 4 to 6 inches of shredded leaves or wood chips across the root zone and up over the crown of the plant. This insulating layer keeps the crown temperature stable through freeze-thaw cycles that would otherwise stress the bud tissue at the base of the canes. Method 2, wire cage with dry leaves. This method is essential for Zone 4 and Zone 5 gardens and highly beneficial in exposed Zone 6 locations. Drive 4 wooden stakes into the ground around the plant. Wrap them with chicken wire or hardware cloth to form a cylinder. Fill that cylinder loosely with dry fallen leaves after the plant has gone dormant. The leaf mass acts as insulation, maintaining a temperature inside the cage that stays measurably warmer than the ambient air outside it. The buds on the canes inside that cage arrive at spring in the same condition they were in when they formed. Intact, viable, and ready to open. Method 3, burlap wrap for exposed locations. For plants in exposed locations or containers that cannot be moved indoors, wrap the canes loosely in burlap after dormancy is established. This protects bud tissue from desiccating wind without trapping moisture against the canes in a way that promotes rot. The burlap comes off in early spring as temperatures stabilize before new growth begins to push. The gardener who does this work in October or November is the one whose hydrangeas are covered in full blooms the following July, while neighboring plants stand green and bare, and their owners search for explanations that the soil, the watering schedule, and the fertilizer routine will never provide. The answer was always in the winter. The buds were always there. They simply needed someone to protect them. Closing. That is what this comes down to across all 7 mistakes and every expert detail covered in this video. Hydrangeas are not difficult plants, they are specific plants. They ask for the right location, the right soil preparation, the right hole dimensions, properly managed roots, deep and consistent moisture, informed pruning timed to variety, a respectful transition from nursery to garden, and protection through the months when the garden looks like nothing is happening but everything is actually being decided. A gardener who gives them those conditions does not need luck. The blooms follow naturally, reliably, season after season, in a way that looks effortless from the outside because the work was done correctly from the beginning.